Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part there for the 10th of February 2025. I've got a lot of content to get through today because I'm not in a good place health-wise, but there's a lot to talk about, so I need to push through it today. To get that out, I've got some serious geopolitical stuff to talk about today. A little bit will happen in the third section to this video because I try and talk about like peace deals in that section, and that necessarily means that we are going to be talking a little bit about politics, which I know some of you don't like in this video, but if you're talking about the end of the war, which is kind of hits and losses and other, that normally comes in the other section. So there you go. Anyway, let's start with the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, and we have some pretty impressive numbers in some categories and some lower numbers in others. So 1,170 is actually a relatively low number for personnel losses, even though it's considerably above 1,000 still. So in the scheme of the whole war, it's a very high number, but it's the lower end of the very high range that we are used to seeing. 9 tanks is about the daily average, 16 troop-carrying AFVs is a little below the daily average, and 35 artillery systems is above it. I was just looking at a conversation with one of you viewers on Twitter talking about loss statistics and the importance of looking at trends and 7-day and 30-day averages. So if we go to the Dell's daily data presentation, we can see, we can have a look at sort of daily averages and whatnot. So in this data presentation that is always available on the in the description to every hits and losses video, we can see on the daily stats, anything that's in kind of the darker the red, if you like, the worse the day is. So fairly bad day for vehicles and fuel tanks. It's interesting now that 109 only gives you a kind of medium pink color, whereas losing 109 vehicles and fuel tanks at the beginning of the war would have been absolutely insane. And yeah, so if we come and look at the daily averages, we see that the 30-day rolling averages for drones is at an all-time high. And that is because the Russians are sending huge numbers of drones every single night. So last night we had, 83 fired into Ukraine, and that's a relatively low night compared to what we have seen. But even though that was last night, the way that the stats for drones get calculated is they kind of have a cut off in the middle of the night, because that's when they produce these stats to get them out for the next morning. So you'll find that drone stats are made up from half of one night and usually half of the night before. So it just so happens that the last 24 hours was 137 drones, which is a very, very high number when the daily average 30-day rolling average is 88, and the daily average, the 7-day rolling average is 104, and the mean average for drones is 22.74 over the entirety of the war. So if we go to look at drones, I mean, this is why you've got such high drone loss numbers, is because, do you know what, if you take in the average from this period, then you've got, less than 20 being fired every night, and then you had these kind of spikes here and there. Now it's just insane as a production of Shahed drones has gone through the roof. So this was when, this part of the war there was when Russia was getting those drones from Iran, and they were having to be produced in Iran, shipped to Russia, and then shipped down to the front lines. Now they're being manufactured in Russia at a huge number, at a huge rate. And so that is pretty challenging for the Ukrainians. So we are seeing now, routinely the rolling averages getting blown out of the water for drones. And then for vehicles and fuel tanks, we've got a 30-day rolling average record as well, 103.47 there. Now, the conversation online that I was just referencing was talking about how artillery is ticking back up. And that, although you can't see it yet in the orange dotted line trend line, you can see that the blue total for the Russian losses in artillery, the steeper the blue line, the better it is for that Ukraine are doing. And that's why this period has the steepest part of the line, and that's because you've got that real purple patch for the Ukrainians. Then it's dipped down. As you can see, they really struggled to hit artillery pieces, don't know quite why, but then it's shifting back up again. So you might see this dotted line then start to shift back upwards. As we can see, it started to get steeper, the blue line around here. So they are picking up on hitting artillery pieces. Just going to look at anti-aircraft because, yeah, no, not too much going on in terms of anti-aircraft. As I said to you, I think yesterday, you know, I have a feeling that Ukraine have done a pretty good job of attriting the anti-aircraft, the Russian anti-aircraft systems. And I was wondering whether it's a good time to start seeing the Ukrainians be a little bit more risky with their airframes. Anyway, as mentioned, 16 AFVs, 35 artillery systems, then 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems. As just mentioned, you know, we don't have too many days like that at the moment, so that's really good news there. 109 vehicles and fuel tanks, very high, as the Russians are using those sorts of vehicles in their attacks and movements to the contact line rather than APCs, and I think that tells us something. One piece of special equipment. Not too many other sources to share with you in this section today. Here we have in the Seversk direction, Ukrainian forces captured many Russian soldiers. They have no will to fight. Ruslan Pidubny, commander of the Antares drone battalion, shared that the enemy's small group advances were stopped. Prisoners admitted low morale and no desire to fight due to heavy losses. And these are anecdotes that we find right across the front line. Low morale doesn't necessarily mean disaster, though. We must remember that even though you got low morale, if you feel that you're going to be shot by these barrier forces, if you go backwards, or you've got commanders that are going to put you in these zindans, these like underground prisons, if you like, you will go forward with your machine gun and run at the enemy. You know, low morale, unless it's so endemic that you get some kind of revolt, anything up until that stage is still Russians being sent against Ukrainians. So that's worth bearing in mind. But yeah, low morale, no desire to fight, completely understandable and predictable. Andrew Perpetua says Russians, and he hasn't got a list out today as far as I can work out. Russians are hoisting flags in Turets. So remember, I talked to you about that video about the Russians trying to hoist a flag at the mine in Turetsk, which was then hit by, you know, literally as a guy that was climbing up to do that, hit by drones dropping munitions. So Perpetua says Russians are hoisting flags in Turetsk now because they need to change the media cycle. They captured Turetsk 2 weeks ago and held back images because they know their worms for brains schmucks will eat up and retweet every flag video. So what Andrew's here is saying that, you know, they captured this 2 weeks ago. That's probably some footage that, you know, of a flag flying on the mine that was taken 2 weeks ago, and it gets released now, and not so much the drones falling on the people doing that, but any bit of snip of footage that shows the Russians in a positive light there in Turetsk is used for PR reasons. So Andrew then says you should be asking what exactly they're trying to hide. So, you know, why are they producing this footage at these particular times and blah, 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 blah. Is it actually trying to reclaim the narrative? Because actually things are looking challenging for the Russians. I was talking yesterday in my Frontline update. I did a 5-day Frontline update yesterday, and I was amazed at actually... So Syriac maps have more blue pins than red pins. In other words, the Ukrainians made more gains over the last 5 days than the Russians did. That's the first time that's been the case for goodness knows how long. Goodness knows. And the lack of advances for the Russians, also with the claims that in the Kursk area, the area where they're doing the best, there are claims that the intensity has really dropped off. You're wondering whether the Russians truly are culminating. I was then lambasted by a couple of trolls. They aren't culminating, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, what explains the data? 5 days, and the Russians have done very little, and there's lots of reports of this. reports of struggling for equipment, struggling for personnel with low morale, no will to fight, etc., etc., etc. All of these data points, the idea of doing this every single day is we do get to see trends. And that is a meaningful trend. Now, it could be that next week the Russians pick up again and they go for it. They're just having a breather. But it could also be that right now they're struggling and it is a form of culmination. We'll come back to this in a second because there's some other well, it's probably a good time to talk about it now, actually, since we're mentioning it. Okay, so in the Kursk region, Russian forces attempted a counteroffensive near Cherkasskaya Konopelka. So this is where the Russians have been on the back foot because the Ukrainians had advanced maybe 5 kilometers into Russian territory and had taken Cherkasskaya Konopelka, and they're trying to take Ulanok. They've taken another Fanasivka. Anyway, the Russians would try to then counter there, but were repelled by paratroopers from the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. So there's lots of fight going on there. And this is Le Figaro. So does this signify a culmination? Ukraine has launched a counterattack to slow down the advance of Russian troops, according to Le Figaro. In recent days, the Ukrainians have intensified their actions in the Kursk, Toretsk, and Pokrovsk regions. So there are counterattacks from the Ukrainians. And I would assume the counterattack, the Ukrainians would be waiting until the Russians have exhausted themselves rather than attacking when the Russians were at their strongest. The Ukrainians are trying to gain time and force the enemy to disperse their efforts. So again, it's worth taking that into account. Right, let's go back to this other section. Now, Tim White talks about another Russia on fire incident. There were other fires in Krasnodar region during the night. Krasnodar was targeted by Ukrainian drones. This is near Sochi, looks most suspicious, though no reason was given for a sudden blaze which destroyed a building there. So more fires taking place in Russia. We hear also about a Ukrainian powerlifting champion that's been arrested by the FSB in Russia. They detained Yulia Lemeschenko, 42, in Voronezh. They accused her of being part of a gang of 4 women planning terrorist attacks in order to reclaim Ukrainian nationality after previously moving to Russia. And then the Russians released footage of them storming the apartment of this woman, and the classic, and this looks so staged to me, but I don't know. Oh look, we found a box with some wires and a mobile phone. And look, we found a plastic bag full of chemicals that we're just going to, it's just, I don't know. This so often is a case with the Russians storming. I mean, yeah, anyway. It may well be that these people were planning a terrorist bombing situation. But, having all of this equipment just very conveniently in I don't know, in a way that it's found. I don't know. It speaks to me of staging, but it might not be. It could have been that they were planning something. Okay, there is a tanker, the Koala. It has sunk in the Ust-Luga port, 130,000 tons on board. This is the one that supposedly there were some explosions in the engine room, maybe, and there are thoughts that it could have been sabotage. It's sunk, although I presume it's not like fully submerged, because I think there are still like search dogs on board looking for stuff. But there's a problem. It's an environmental time bomb now ticking. It's time we put an end to this one hull rust bucket shadow fleet shipping that creates revenues for Satan's war in Ukraine, says Tim Hermansen. And in fact, we're going to return to that idea later because it looks like the EU are doing something about that. But we'll return to that soon. Right, distant strikes, 100% record in air defense overnight for the Ukrainians. That's really good news because they've had a bit of a mottled form over the last few weeks. Of the 83 that were sent into Ukraine, 61 were shot down and 22 were EW or decoys. There was a fire in Sumy, damage to Kharkiv and Poltava and Kirovohrad as well from falling debris from these drones. Unfortunately, they still do cause an issue when they are shot down. What else do we have? Russia attacked Poltava, so here's some evidence of the drone debris. During the night, wreckage caused fires which quickly spread, and as many as 30 dachas, private, second or holiday homes may have been damaged by the flames there. So a lot of damage still caused. Also, damage caused in Kharkiv. Emergency services took 5 hours to control a massive blaze there at an agricultural enterprise in Vovchansk. That's obviously, the site of major war. That's pretty much Frontline. Elsewhere in the region, shelling took place. There was also... No, I think that there was more damage to elsewhere, but I can't remember where. Oh, here it is, Kramatorsk, that was it. One person was killed in Kramatorsk when Russia hit the city with an aerial guided glide bomb. Another 9 were injured, while an apartment building, a family medicine clinic and an educational institution and shops were all damaged, according to local officials. So we have some damage to Kramatorsk, which is on that semicircle of cities that are now much more vulnerable that Chasiv Yar, now that Chasiv Yar seems to be in a lot of trouble. You've got Druskivka, you've got Konstantinivka first, then Druskivka, Kramatorsk, Slovyansk, all of them much closer to the Russians. Elsewhere in the free part of Donetsk, 13 other attacks recorded by Ukrainian officials. Seversk, Sviatohirsk, and other places that were damaged. So there you go. Now, the Ukrainians giving some attention to the left bank of the Dnipro River in occupied Kherson. I don't know what the damage was, but there was lots of glowing and burning in nocturnal video footage caught by the Ukrainians. Strikes and explosions were reported last night, and I guess at some point today or over the next few days we might find out the details of what took place in the Kherson area. Also, the Afipsky oil refinery in Krasnodar Krai was hit at a capacity of 6.25 million tons per year. I don't know what the overall damage done to that refinery was. There were also drones that were trying to hit it, I think, that were knocked off course and then went into residential areas near that. I don't know if it says it here. Tim White says, in Russia, air defense seems to have knocked a drone onto the house in Krasnodar. Last night I showed a video of an unknown explosion, which turns out to be in Afipsky near the refinery. So the question will be whether that was actually the refinery or not. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. Russia says drone debris also fell on the roof of a residential complex in Krasnodar. No one was hurt there. And by the way, speaking of Krasnodar, it's interesting, this bit of footage, its archive footage, is doing the rounds at the moment. One could reasonably argue that Krasnodar, so if you think Berdyansk and Mariupol, that goes on to Rostov-on-Don, and then is it south of Rostov-on-Don is Krasnodar Krai, or Krasnodar, the oblast there, which is relatively close to Ukraine. And there's archive media in Russia proved you could reasonably argue that this is unoccupied territory as well. Archive media in Russia proved it in the words of their own residents in the days when one could speak the truth. This had to be edited to under 60 seconds, but his full clip is on Twitter. But this is basically a bunch of locals in, obviously from the 60s, 70s, 60s, 50s maybe, talking about how they've all got Ukrainian surnames and then often have to change their Ukrainian surnames to Russian versions thereof, I think, and basically just talking about how they're all former Zaporizhians there, and there's a lot of Ukrainian influence in that part of Russia. Whether that's still the case, I don't know. It's a bit like up in Belgorod, where you have people talking about, and you have these dialects up there that are half Ukrainian, half Russian. So it's not so simple to say, this is Russia and everyone's right, pro-Russian, as soon as you cross the border. Now, going on to other bits and pieces, as mentioned, there's heavy fighting in Kursk. It looks like the Ukrainians are pushing back in some places. Special Kherson Cat, if you remember, I showed you this footage back in August last year of Russians looting their own shops and enterprises in places like Glushkovo, but also Koronovo as well. These places around Kursk where they've been sent to defend from the Ukrainians. Ukrainians never quite got to either of those places, and yet they were heavily looted, and all the commercial enterprises were kind of shut down or looted. And yeah, it's because the Russians are looting their own stuff. So, as Special Curse on Cat here says in reference to that, recognizing the problem of mass looting by Russian military in the Russian-controlled part of Kursk region. They're recognizing the problem their own troops are causing. I mean, you did not see this with Ukrainians. They haven't looted their own place. When Ukraine, and I said this before in August, when Ukraine was invaded by the Russians, everyone pulled together and they supported their own commercial entities and businesses, and there was just none of this. None of the looting happened from Russian soldiers in Ukraine. Well, it's happened in Russia itself as well, as they loot their own stuff that they're supposed to be protecting. And there is a real cultural difference there that you can pick out between the Ukrainians and the Russians here. I don't like to paint entire peoples with a simplistic brush, but it really is hard not to with the Russians when they're the ones that openly committing war crimes consistently in a way that Ukrainians aren't, that are committing crimes against their own people in a way that Ukrainians aren't. There are these, I think, discernible differences between the two people that really facilitate being able to paint the Russians with quite a simplistic brush. Anyway, as Special Curse on Cat says, recognizing problem of mass looting by Russian military in the Russian-controlled part of the Kursk region, the acting governor of the Kursk region, Alexander Hinstein, has created a separate hotline for citizens to contact regarding the looting of their homes and businesses. We have heard a lot of pushback against the governor from citizens of Kursk, where they've had these like town hall meetings and they've given him a really rough time. I think I referenced or showed you a little bit of one of them recently. Pretty incredible. They are not happy, and rightfully so. I think it's been incredibly badly mismanaged by the Russians, this attack into Kursk. Now, Zelensky has announced the creation of the Drone Line project, which should strengthen the brigades on the front lines and make Russian assaults impossible. 5 of the best unmanned units have united to work on it. So let's have a look at this. This is in the Kyiv Independent. The Drone Line project has started. Okay, so project seeks to enhance combat effectiveness by expanding the use of drones within elite units of the ground forces and the State Border Guard Service. And remember, there's also the move to make corps, by using some of the best, most elite units, assault units, third assault, Azov, etc., and have them create their own kind of mini army, if you like, a corps whereby you get these other units then under their command. So hopefully there's a swapping of best practices. These are better organized units that do much better at recruitment, blah, blah, blah. You're spreading that amongst these other units that are assigned to you, and you create much greater or much more functional, better functioning kind of mini armies, rather than having the fragmented approach that appears to be the case across the front line with Ukraine's armed forces as they stand. Anyway, elite units of the ground forces and State Border Guard Service will have the drone units expanded. Defense Minister Rustem Umerov described the initiative as a transformative step in modern warfare, emphasizing that the unmanned systems will play a central role in combat. Quote, "This is a new standard of war where unmanned systems becomes a key element of combat, helping our defenders carry out the most complex missions. First phase of the project will focus on 5 elite regiments and brigades: the 20th Separate Regiment K2, 429th Regiment Achilles, the 427th Regiment Raro, the 414th Brigade Magyar's Birds, and the Phoenix Regiment, which is part of the Pomstat Brigade. These units have already demonstrated effectiveness in drone warfare and will now see their capabilities significantly scaled up, according to the minister. By integrating infantry and drones into a unified strike system, the drone line aims to create a 10 to 15 kilometer deep kill zone, ensuring that enemy forces cannot move without sustaining heavy losses. This will fundamentally change battlefield tactics, giving our warriors a decisive advantage," Umerov said in a post on Facebook. The initiative will also provide constant aerial support for infantry and enhance target detection and destruction before adversaries reach Ukrainian positions. The defense ministry credited Zelensky for spearheading the initiative and highlighted the ongoing work of Ukraine's defense industry in advancing drone technology, which sounds all absolutely brilliant. I do wonder, however, why they advertise this so much. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to organise ourselves. And Russia's going, oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, I think we'll have that as well. So, yeah, I do wonder about that. Nonetheless, that is happening, or appears to be on the way towards happening. And hopefully that marriage between the infantry and drones and the military industrial complex, these organizations that are very reactively, that feedback loop that's so effective, reactively providing Ukraine with the drones that they need for the front line. I think this could be a good sign for Ukraine going forward. Now, on the other hand, and this goes towards like there being this difference between Ukraine and Russia in a meaningful way. This is a Wall Street Journal reporting. In the weeks after Russia invaded Ukraine, the head of St. Petersburg's prisons delivered a direct message to an elite unit of guards tasked with overseeing the influx of prisoners of war. Quote, "Be cruel, don't pity them." So this then brought about beatings, electric shocks, medical neglect, all of which led to amputations. So the Wall Street Journal reports, "Be cruel inside Russia's torture system for Ukrainian POWs." This is a sort of, and I've talked about this before, this is a sort of journalism that needs to happen in America particularly to make sure that the American population understands who the bad guys are and where the cruelty is. And I'm going to revisit that idea in a second, because I think right at the top of the American political system, we have problems with regard to whose side are they really on. So Wall Street Journal here, Russia systematically tortured Ukrainian POWs for nearly 3 years. Guards were ordered to be cruel with no restrictions. Beatings, electric shocks, medical neglect led to amputations. The International Criminal Court is investigating. Of course, the International Criminal Court, which is being sanctioned by the US. But there you go. But Russia denies abuses. Of course they do. Now, talking about peace here, this is the sort of thing that I will talk about this also in a geopolitical video later, but the US will discuss ways to end Russia's wars against Ukraine this week, Trump's National Security Advisor Mike Waltz said. Top officials will meet in Europe to speak about plans, with Waltz stressing that Europe must take full responsibility for security guarantees. Now, this is where I'm very close to ranting, okay? But I won't. I'll try and be level-headed. There's part of me that thinks Europe should say, okay, we'll take you want us to take responsibility for everything. You think you're paying for everything. Trump keeps saying it. Walz is now saying it. You keep taking. You say that you're paying the lion's share. We're not paying enough, even though that's not true. You want us to pay more. You've also said that we're the ones that have to give security guarantees. You're not going to give security guarantees. You've also said, and we'll come on to this in a second, that you want to help yourselves to Ukrainian rare earth resources, and we aren't doing that in Europe. So, if that's how you want to play this, you can take every single one of your American bases, you can take your nuclear warheads from RAF Lakenheath, and you can feck off and take all your stuff out of Europe and take it back to the United States, right? Because you think we're all doing this. Okay, we will do all of this. You can take all of your power that's in Europe and you can sod off. Because if you're going to keep on insulting us, and if you're going to say we're not doing enough, and if you're going to put tariffs on stuff coming out of Europe, and if you're going to do this and if you're going to do that, then quite frankly I'm fed up of you milking the Europe for your own power gains. So you can take all of your, let's look at how many bases there are in Europe, because as far as I'm aware there are no European bases in America. So here's just one. There's a bunch of military bases there. You can see there may be, I don't know, maybe a dozen military bases in Europe. Take those, take them away, and then you can't access the Middle East. Gaza that you want to bulldoze and turn into a Riviera. Well, in that ethnic cleansing. Well, you can't use Europe as a landing base for that. So, stop pissing us off by insulting us, right? And then helping yourself by exploiting Ukraine's all their natural resources, and understand that Europe is an important part of your power projection around the world. If you don't have Europe, America, you don't get to have influence in the Middle East, in Africa, Europe is your staging ground, and we let you have influence here. Obviously, I'm being rhetorically robust here, and there would be problems with taking all of those soldiers, spending their money and supply chains and all sorts of things that are beneficial for Europe by having American troops and bases there. But the principle, I am getting really annoyed about how the rhetoric that is coming from America at the moment, and it is pretty insulting. The US intends to discuss the issue of reimbursement of costs that were provided for aid to Kyiv, in particular through agreements on Ukrainian natural resources. So Europe is providing more money to Ukraine than the US. The US is lying about that and saying that Europe needs to do more, even though the stats don't support that. And then America is saying, and we're going to have our costs reimbursed by helping ourselves to your natural resources. Europe's not doing it. I think we need to just start getting harsh on the US at the moment. And I don't mean that about all my many amazing US supporters and viewers here. I'm talking about the present administration that seems to be hell bent on destroying US power around the world, while also transactionally demanding stuff directly from Ukraine and slagging off their allies of Europe and trying to extract things from Europe as well, whilst also having all their military bases in Europe to be able to project power around the world. I think it's time that I think we need to call America's bluff. We need to recoup these costs, Mike Walls, on the future of US aid to Ukraine. US aid to Kyiv is going to be a partnership with the Ukrainians in terms of their rare earths, their natural resources and their oil and gas, and also buying ours. So we're going to force you to buy our stuff. We're going to take stuff from your country, and then that will allow us to help you. Whereas the EU is going, hang on, we're just helping them as part of those strategic objectives. But, the US has gone full on transactional. Trump claims progress on ending the Russia-Ukraine war and confirms contact with Putin. So now we've had New York Post saying that Trump has had several phone calls with Putin. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One, US President Donald Trump confirms that he and Russian President Putin have been in contact. This is where it gets worrying, because now we are seeing Donald Trump reposting Putin's claims. Putin says Europe will stand at the feet of the master as Trump's tariffs alarm allies. Happy to be on the sidelines, Russia's Kremlin says it's watching the tensions Trump's tariffs are spreading. Donald Trump then reposts that. So he is happy that Putin is happy that there are tensions between the EU and the US. And he is amplifying that. Do you not understand what is going on here? Everything, like the CIA, the FBI being cut back, counterterrorism, intelligence. You've got US aid being stopped, which is a power projection of the US around the world. We've got the kleptocracy unit being disbanded. We've got the foreign influence in US elections being disbanded, that department being disbanded. And now we're hearing that Radio Free Europe and Radio Free Liberty, that were partly responsible for ending communism, being stopped as well. So Musk calls for shutting down US-funded outlets, Radio Free Europe, Voice of America. Yes, shut them down. Europe is free now, not counting stifling bureaucracy. Nobody listens to them anymore. And I show you loads of stuff from RFL and RFE. Radio Free Europe played a crucial role in the collapse of communism by breaking state censorship, exposing regime crimes, and amplifying dissident voices, helping to inspire resistance movements across Eastern Europe. Its broadcasts provided millions with uncensored news and a vision of democracy, making it a vital force for freedom during the Cold War. Many who lived through the fall of the USSR and the transition to democracy in Eastern Europe know well its crucial role in that transformation, which makes it even more disheartening to see the US now undermining its own legacy and soft power by turning away from institutions that once championed freedom and truth. And Elon Musk here says, yes, shut them down. Europe is free now, not counting stifling bureaucracy. Hello. Nobody listens to them anymore. It's just radical left crazy people talking to themselves while torching $1 billion a year of US taxpayer money. Of course, he doesn't have a clue what these people are doing and saying. I report on them very commonly. Jane Kiev says, if it's an enemy of Putin, it's an enemy of Musk. Musk will now destroy Radio Liberty and Voice of America. This is not good. And then when you put it together with this, the New York Post, talking about the telephone call between Putin and Trump, acknowledged his phone call with Putin, Trump's phone call with Putin. In an exclusive interview, he said he spoke to Putin to find ways to end the war. Trump believes Putin, quote, cares about casualties and has a specific plan to stop the war, calling it horrible. So calling the war horrible. So he actually thinks Putin cares about casualties. Now, if so, this is why I just want to rant, because Trump is an idiot. I'm sorry if you like him, more fool you. Specifically to do with what's going on with Ukraine. He's an idiot, doesn't understand Ukraine, doesn't understand Putin, loves Putin, and therefore believes Putin when he says that he cares about casualties. Putin is gone out of his way to torture POWs, or at least, those those orders have been put out there to commit war crimes aplenty, to kill civilians, and you somehow think he cares about casualties. It's insanity. So I personally think that Europe should just like cut off US, say to Ukraine, don't allow US to have your rare earth metals. Just don't even think about continued aid for them. Just sod them. We'll do this ourselves. And by the way, US, you can have all your bases back and you have no power in Europe anymore. And you don't get to say what goes on in Europe. I think we just cut America loose. By shutting down US aid, Trump is handing on a silver platter to China the perfect opportunity to expand its influence at a time when China's economy is not doing very well. So at a time when Russia's on its knees, China's looking pretty dodgy with regard to its own economy and its own demographics. This is a time where the US should be turning the screw, and it's the time where the US is giving everything to China, is handing the keys of power to China and Russia. It's just absolute geopolitical suicide. At the same time, North Korean citizens are entering Russia. Now there's a number put on that, many on student visas, yeah, of course. The Institute for the Study of War, citing Yonhap, the South Korean intelligence agencies, report that these citizens arrived for, scare quotes, construction work. Well, no, they are arriving for construction work. It's like, scare quotes, student visas. That's what I mean. Due to a labour shortage caused by the war in Ukraine. 7,887 entered under the pretense of studying. And of course, that's your absolute minimum. There could be tens and tens of thousands of North Koreans. And the question is, are they ever going to go back to North Korea? Now they tasted, albeit a Russian form of Western society, if you can call it that. Whole can of worms there. Anyway, now, EUs seem to be getting pretty serious here. EU prepares for a major operation to seize Russian-linked tankers of shadow fleets in the Baltic. According to Politico, new legislation will allow ships to be seized, and I like this. This is thinking creatively. Well, also, this is good and right and proper. Seized for damage they may cause to the environment. So a lot of these shadow fleets are not fit for purpose when they are breaking up in, say, in the Black Sea and causing environmental disasters. We've got other ships that, like that one that was seized, is it Yiping 3? That was seized for potentially doing a Chinese ship with a Russian crew for doing damage to the cables, and it was found to be completely unfit for purpose. So actually, you can seize these not under the pretense, but actually justifiably, because they are not fit for operating in the Baltic Sea, and you'll also have an effect on the Russian shadow fleet, and perhaps also do something to safeguard your own cables in that area. So new legislation will allow ships to be seized for damage they may cause to the environment and for damage to submarine cables and other critical infrastructure. Excellent there. And in fact, comprising 7.4% of Russia's exports, the price of coal continues to collapse. So this is good news economically for Russia, as they can't get, if the price of oil goes down and the price of coal goes down, then that will affect Russia's ability to make money to support the war. If you look at how much that coal has gone down since where it was in sort of 2022, then Russia's going to struggle to make serious money to help prosecute their war. Anyway, that's enough from me. Hopefully that was of use. Sorry, there's a lot of political. I know a lot of you don't like political stuff in this video, but we talk about like ending the war in this section of the video, which is like peace plans and whatnot. And when the US is talking about how much Putin cares and is spreading disinformation while shutting down their own form of like positive propaganda for the US. Then it has to be talked about. This is just all the decisions getting made in the Trump administration now are having champagne corks popping in Moscow and Beijing. It's absolutely insane. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.